Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and it is Monday, and we are actually doing breaches of the week from last week because Sunday, and I apologize, it just was so crazy with travel and everything else. I did not get a chance to compile everything and do it, but so Monday, here we are doing it. And before I begin, as always, I'd like to thank the following people that sent me a lot of this information. It always helps me out. And that would be Jason Dance, Bob Hall, and Chris Fallon. Guys, thank you very much. And if you have a tip for me, please feel free to send it my way, and I'll give you a shout out here and on my nationally syndicated radio show as well. And with that, let's start with Walgreens. Yes, Walgreens, the massive pharmacy chain here in the United States. If you got a COVID test at a Walgreens, your personal data, including your name, date of birth, gender identity, phone number, address, and email, was left open on the internet for potentially anyone to see and for multiple ad trackers on the Walgreens site to collect. In some cases, according to reports, even the results of these tests could be basically taken from this information. Now, the data exposure potentially affects millions of people who used or continue to use Walgreens' COVID-19 testing services over the course of the pandemic. According to Alejandro Ruiz, a consultant with Interstitial Technology, they discovered this issue in March after a family member, or he specifically, I should say, discovered this issue in March after a family member got a COVID test. He says he contacted Walgreens over email, phone, and through the website security form, and Walgreens was basically non-responsive to him. Essentially, the website was left open, and so if you knew what to do, you could go ahead and just pretty much look at anybody's information. Walgreens, though, they didn't contact him, and they also wouldn't say how long its testing registration platform has had these vulnerabilities. These go back at least as far as March, which was when Mr. Ruiz discovered them, and likely far longer than that. Obviously, it had been there for a while. He didn't discover it on day one. Now, Walgreens has offered COVID-19 tests since April of 2020, and according to the Internet Wayback Machine, which obviously keeps archives of these kinds of things, it shows blank test confirmation data pages as far back as July of 2020, indicating these issues are probably over a year old. So obviously a huge problem. Hopefully Walgreens will get that straightened out, but if you've used Walgreens, heads up, they may be declaring a HIPAA breach sooner than later. Moving on, let's talk about the customer care giant TTEC. They're dealing with disruptions from a network security incident resulting in a ransomware attack, according to Krebs on Security. Great blog, you should read it. Now, on September 14th, Krebs on Security heard from a reader who passed on an internal message apparently sent by a TTEC employee to their employees regarding the status of a widespread system outage on Sunday, September 12th. Quote, "We are continuing to address the system outage impacting our access to the network, applications, and customer support." According to this message, it looks like the Ragnar Locker ransomware gang is responsible for this. We'll see where that goes. Moving on, let's talk about South Africa's Department of Justice, their DOJ. The Justice Ministry of the South African government is working on restoring operations after a recent ransomware attack encrypted all of its systems, basically making all electronic services unavailable both internally and to the citizens of South Africa. Now, as a consequence of this attack, the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development said that child maintenance payments, I'm guessing that's the equivalent of child support payments here in the United States, those are now on hold until the systems are back online. This attack apparently happened September 6th, and as of September 15th, the attack had not been claimed by any of the gangs on a data leak site, and so we'll see where that goes. But heads up, South Africans, your Department of Justice is currently down, hopefully restored by now. Moving on, let's talk about Get Health. This is a New York-based unified solution for health and wellness apps. Basically, their clients that integrate them are like Fitbit, Google Fit, 23andMe, and a host of others. And you see where I'm going with this. An unsecured database containing the IoT health and fitness tracking device data was found to be exposing more than 61 million records tied to fitness app users from across the globe. This database obviously belonged to Get Health, and when they were notified, the database was secured the next day. In total, the database contains 16.71 gigabytes of information tied to user profiles, fitness, heart rates, pulse, sleep records, other trackers, and then obviously daily health-related information. So you're counting calories in your app, there you go. Now, many of the internal database records contained plain text user data, meaning it could be read without any effort, that had basically sensitive information, including names, dates of birth, physical descriptions, if you basically said, hey, I weigh this, I'm this, blah, 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 and geolocation. That's right. They know where you are. Now, in one instance, A sampling of 20,000 of these records belong to some of the most popular health and fitness trackers. A Fitbit data set in that 20,000 basically was 2,766 instances in that. Certain files even displayed where the data was stored on the device, as well as a blueprint of the back end of the network operations and configurations, basically a roadmap for any attacker to get deeper into the system. One of the largest records was labeled Apple Health Kit, which appeared 17,764 times. The concern here is that the health kit collects complex metrics like blood pressure, glucose, body weight, and other personal health data operating silently in the background on any iPhone permitted by the user. So this is a huge problem. So if you're using basically Google Fit, the list, Fitbit, Apple, 23andMe, and others, they're all integrating this Get Health technology, and they exposed everybody. So that's obviously a huge problem. There you go. So all you healthy folks, exercise will get you killed, and it also get you exposed. Moving on, let's talk about actually something that dovetails with the Get Health data breach I just talked about, and that's a new FTC ruling that happened this week, and now Get Health is going to be in even more trouble because apparently the U.S. Federal Trade Commissioner, FTC, has warned apps and devices that collect personal health information now must notify consumers if their data is breached or if it's shared with third parties without their permission. Go FTC. Now, in a 3-2 vote on Wednesday, the FTC agreed on a new policy to clarify the decade-old 2009, to 2019. It seems like a decade ago, thanks to the pandemic. 2009 health breach notification rule, which essentially requires companies handling health records to notify consumers if their data is accessed without permission, such as the result of a breach. This has now been extended to apply to health apps and devices, specifically calling out apps that track fertility data, fitness and blood glucose, which often obviously are a huge problem, and, quote, too often fail to invest in adequate privacy and data security, according to the FTC chair, Linda Kahn. And I've talked about that before. Fertility apps have been hit, fitness apps have been hit, all of these kinds of things. Now, prior to this was not actually protected under HIPAA. The FTC is stepping in and saying, if you're a fitness app or a fertility tracking app or one of those, you have to declare. Huge problem. Dovetails with Get Health, literally came out on the heels of that. Moving on. Let's talk about the Desert Wells Family Medicine, basically company in Arizona. The practice began notifying their 35,000 patients that their protected health information had been compromised. And we are talking about names, dates of birth, addresses, billing and account numbers. Personal information also included medical records, treatment information, social security numbers, and on and on and on. Now, the practice had backed up all of its data before the attack, but the attackers managed to encrypt both the original files and the backups using ransomware. Desert Wells said it's done everything that it could to retrieve the encrypted data, including engaging external specialists, but their efforts have proved fruitless. All EHR information added to the Wells system prior to the attack has essentially been lost forever, and the practice is currently constructing an entirely new EHR system, electronic health record system. So there you go. Proof that you need multiple forms of backup, proof that you need hardened protected cloud backup, proof that you need immutable storage on premise, proof that you need multi-factor authentication with identity management ideally when logging into these hardened backups. A single backup doesn't cut it. Moving on, I want to actually give you an update on Blackbaud. I'm amazed. If you remember, like over a year ago, Blackbaud basically had a massive data breach, and for weeks and weeks and weeks on Breaches of the Week, I was bringing you up to date on those companies that had to declare as a result of this. Well, we've got some stragglers because this week, Northern Light Health and their nonprofit, Life Flight of Maine, have both declared. So if you're in the state of Maine and you use Northern Light Health, or you contribute or donate to Life Flight of Maine, heads up to you. You got hit over a year ago. They're just getting around now to telling you. Moving on. Let's talk about Simon I Management. They got hit on June 8th of this year. An unauthorized access, or rather they discovered it, unauthorized access to certain employee email accounts between May 12th and May 18th of this year is essentially what happened. Their investigation revealed that an unauthorized third party attempted to basically do a business email compromise scam and engage in wire transfers, invoice manipulation, all of that. They are saying none of that was successful, but Obviously, they got into the mailbox, and so the information that got out there was the individual's name, medical history, treatment or diagnosis information, health insurance information, including policy and or subscriber information, insurance application, including claim forms, and for a smaller number of individuals, social security numbers, dates of birth, or financial account information may be there. Importantly, to date, they have no evidence at the moment of misuse. Hopefully that is true. Hopefully that business email compromise scam went nowhere. But if you have anything to do with Simon I, as in eyeball, eye management, you might want to check in. And let's move on because I want to talk about Revil. If you recall, they're basically a ransomware gang that went dark. Essentially, they basically spun up last week. Basically, they are back online with fresh victims listed on their website, ransomware payments back up and flowing, all of that. Basically, they also had an explanation of why they took a 2-month hiatus. I went to the website myself as I track Revil, or was tracking Revil, and here we are. Sure enough, they are up, and they've got a whole bunch of info out there on this. So Revil's back in business, and that should be terrifying for all of us because they were the most prolific gang out there, and I believe they will continue to be. So heads up, Revil is back in business. That sucks. Moving on. Let's talk about Olympus, a leading medical technology company, and they are investigating a potential cybersecurity incident that impacted some of its EMEA, that's Europe, Middle East, and Africa, IT systems last week. Now, apparently this happened on September 8th of 2020, and basically the indicators are that Black Matter ransomware was essentially there. Now, if you don't know who Black Matter is, they're relatively a new ransomware gang that surfaced in July of 2020, and they were initially believed to be a rebranding of the DarkSide ransomware gang. If you recall, DarkSide is the one that hit Colonial Pipeline, in which what we all considered an amateur hour data breach. Now, from samples collected by researchers after some of the subsequent attacks, it was later confirmed that Black Matter ransomware encryption was indeed the same custom and unique ones that DarkSide was using. So DarkSide is back. They pulled an exit scam. They knew the heat was on. They are back as Black Matter, according to all indicators. So here we are. Gangs are continuing to proliferate. Moving on. I want to talk about massive tech company and hosting provider NetGain. Basically, they had a September 2020 data breach, and I reported on that. I remember reporting on that. I went back and looked, and I did. And sure enough, we are still seeing disclosures from that after a year. Now, the one that's disclosing is Lifelong Medical. They have 115,448 patients affected by that. And so if you use or are a patient of Lifelong Medical, heads up to you. Moving on, I want to give you guys a quick update on Apple products. And this is really important because they just patched iPhones, iPads, Apple Watches, and MacBooks due to the NSO Group's Pegasus vulnerability. I actually did videos and podcasts on that, talking about how they were breaking into like everything around the world, into your iPhone. That was completely up to date. They finally got around to patching and fixing that. And they also patch vulnerabilities in the Safari web browser. So if you have an iPhone, an iPad, an Apple Watch, a MacBook, if you have Apple anything in your life, just update the thing at this point so you can start thwarting the actual attack that gives full control to your phone over to somebody else. Ideally not a government. Moving on, let's talk about Nevada Restaurant Services, or NRS. They're the owner of actually a popular slot parlor chain known as Dottie's, and I swear I've driven by Dottie's, like Dottie's locations here in Chicago, and they disclosed a data breach that exposed a significant amount of personal and financial information. In a statement, the company confirmed that, quote, certain customers, end quote, were affected by the breach. This information includes social security numbers, driver's license numbers, state ID, passport, financial account and routing numbers, health insurance information, treatment information, biometric data, medical records, taxpayer identification numbers, and credit card numbers and expiration dates. And given that mix, it looks like both employees and customers of NRS or Dottie's has been hit. They have 200 locations, across Nevada, Oregon, Montana, and Illinois. So that's why I've seen them here in Chicago. This is actually stemming from a January of 2021 malware attack. So heads up if you use Dottie's for all your slot and gambling needs. Moving on. Let's talk about the Alaska Department of Health, because they have been warned that a highly sophisticated cyber attack may have exposed residents' personal data, including financial information. The malware attack, which took place in May before their systems were shut down to stop the hit, the attackers potentially had access to full names, dates of birth, social security numbers, addresses, phone numbers, driver's license, health information, and financial information. Internal identifying numbers such as Medicaid or case reports and historical information concerning individuals' interactions with the Alaska Department of Health were also potentially exposed. So heads up to you, Alaskans, if you have used your Department of Health up there, heads up, you probably have an issue. You might want to check in. Moving on, let's talk about the Mankato Clinic in Minnesota. They are notifying more than 500 patients of a breach of basically unprotected health information. Now, this happened on August 3rd, and this is what happened. Electronic spreadsheet, probably an Excel file containing patient information for 535 patients, was mistakenly emailed to a colleague of a Mankato Clinic employee to an external email account. The email was not encrypted, and there you go. Exfiltration of data. That's a data breach. We're talking patient full name, address, phone number, email address, date of birth, sex, medical record number, healthcare provider name, diagnosis information, and primary insurance carrier social security numbers were not included in this information. And this could have been a very well-meaning employee that accidentally emailed something out. Or another problem that we have is they'll just email themselves information to their house and then work from home and then email it back. All of these things are verboten under HIPAA because you have to obviously have good security controls, including encryption on all of these things, not to mention access lists and all that kind of stuff. So huge problem. And if you use the Mankato Clinic, if you're one of the 535, you definitely want to give them a call. Moving on. Let's talk about the Indonesian government ministries and agencies, and I'm giving you an update from a breach I reported on them a couple of weeks ago. Now, according to a team of threat researchers called the Insect Group, as quoted by cybersecurity news outlet The Record this past Sunday, apparently Chinese hackers breached the internal networks of at least 10 Indonesian government ministries and agencies, including computers from the Indonesian intelligence agency. Insect Security basically linked the security threat to Mustang Panda, a known Chinese threat actor that is known for cyber espionage campaigns targeting Southeast Asia countries. And so obviously that's a huge, huge thing. I talked about that data breach. Now we have a third-party confirmation that the indicators of compromise point to Chinese intelligence. We'll see where that goes. Obviously a huge problem. Moving on, let's talk about Exabytes. They're mainly known for domain and web hosting services. They got hit with a ransomware attack, and according to a notice that was posted in their community forums on their support site at 9:12 p.m. September 18th, basically their disrupted operations hit 160,000 of their clients, and as of the end of day on April 18th, they had only restored 3%, and so hopefully they're totally back online now. Ransomware, not a fun thing, especially if you're a massive hosting provider like Exabytes. Moving on, let's talk about the city of Yonkers. I reported on this one a while back as well. They had a data breach, and apparently the city has decided not to negotiate with terrorists. Now, the meeting of city officials resulted in a unanimous decision to stop paying ransom demands altogether, including the $10 million ransom in question here from the last time they were hit. So, city of Yonkers, good on ya. Moving on, let's talk about VoIP.ms or voiceoverip.ms. They've had about a week-long cyber attack that knocked out pretty much all of their customers. Phones weren't working, and people were basically, customers were actually finding out more information on their Facebook page. They have now restored their operations, hopefully to full. Apparently it was a ransomware and denial of service attacks were to blame for this, but basically if you were using VoIP.ms, you weren't using them for the last week. Back online, hopefully they are not just online, but hardened as well. And finally, and we have two finalies to go over here. First, I want to talk about former NSA employees Mark Bayer, Ryan Adams, and Daniel Gurecki, something like that. They broke U.S. export control laws that require companies and individuals to obtain a special license from the State Department's Directorate of Defense Controls, or DTTC, before providing defense-related services to a foreign government. And according to court documents, the three suspects helped the UAE company develop and successfully deploy at least 2 hacking tools. The three entered into basically a first-of-its-kind deferred prosecution agreement with with the Department of Justice the other day, agreeing to pay $750,000, $600,000, and $335,000 respectively over a 3-year term in order to avoid jail time for their actions. Now, I've actually reported on this one before. Per the Reuters report and DOJ officials, the three worked as contractors for the UAE company Dark Matter between January of 2016 and November of 2019. The former NSA analyst also worked inside Project Raven, which was a team inside Dark Matter that was made up of more than a dozen former U.S. intelligence operatives. Inside this project, the three developed the Karma and Karma 2, basically attacks, which were two iOS, that's Apple's operating system for their iPhone, zero-click exploits. This was basically designed to target iPhones, and essentially this was used by UAE officials to spy on dissidents, reporters, government opposition leaders around the world. It was a huge, huge thing. I did a long video on that. I think I actually talked about that on as the deep dive segment on my radio show as well. So it's a huge, huge thing. And finally, and we've got one more finally for you, and that would be Epic hosting, EPIK. I actually posted on this a couple of days ago, but this is the first time I'm talking about this. Now, here's the backstory. Basically, Anonymous, the hacker collective or hacktivist collective, if you're not familiar with them, most people are, they weren't a fan of the new Texas abortion law. And again, I am not talking about politics here. I don't care if you love it or hate it or anything like that. But basically, they're not a fan of the Texas abortion law, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So they basically stated publicly that they were going to take down the whistleblower website that had been set up by the state of Texas. You could go to this whistleblower website, and if you knew a woman that was going to have an abortion or had one, you could basically blow the whistle, and I believe you were going to be compensated for $10,000 and all of that. We'll talk about that in a bit. So originally, GoDaddy was hosting this Texas whistleblower site. GoDaddy basically killed that service because they said that this website from the state of Texas was basically violating the terms of services. Texas then moved to basically Epic Hosting to run them. Now, Epic Hosting is a domain registrar and web services provider known to serve essentially, and again, not getting into politics, these are just the facts on the ground. They're known to serve right-wing clients, some of which have been turned down by more mainstream IT providers due to their objectionable and sometimes illicit content hosted by the clients. Parler, Gab, some of those are basically sitting on Epic. Now, Anonymous claims to obtain gigabytes of data from Epic, which provides domain name hosting and DNS services and all of that. These include the data that was dumped. The Texas include the Texas GOP, Gab, as I just mentioned, Parler, as I just mentioned, 8chan, as I've talked about in the past. That's where Q from QAnon originated. Many people believe the owner of 8chan, Ron Watkins, is actually Q and has been doing and proliferating this whole thing. And obviously, other right-wing sites outside of that have all had their data stolen. Now, the stolen data has been released as a BitTorrent, and the Hacktivist Collective says that the data set, which is over 180 gigabytes of size, contains a decade's worth of data from the company. Members of the whistleblowing site Distributed Denial of Secrets, or DDoS Secrets, have also made the data set available via alternative means for those unable to use BitTorrent. Now, Anonymous also tampered with Epic's knowledge base to mock the company's denial of the breach. Prior to this incident, Anonymous had defaced the Texas GOP website by replacing references to Help Texas Stay Red with Texas, taking voices from women to promote theocratic erosion of church-state barriers. The group also added a donate link to the Texas GOP website to the reproductive healthcare nonprofit Planned Parenthood. Obviously, they're typically at the center of abortion controversies because that's one of the services they provide. And so that is obviously a huge, huge thing. I think there's a lot of information that's going to come out from Epic Hosting that's going to give a lot of cybersecurity researchers, basically access into where a lot of extremism lives. And I'm not saying, again, what your politics are, I don't care, but we have seen actual in court cases documented messages and posts and all of this that are being used in conjunction with things like the January 6th Capitol riot, as well as other other events for extremism, and a lot of that information just got moved out there. So we might see another massive Parler dump in the same way that just after January 6th, Parler, because of poor API security, had all of their information, videos, messages, everything basically copied out of their network. We may see this again because they have everything, or they're claiming they've got decryption keys and everything else, and obviously Epic is scrambling to re-key everything, re-secure everything. It's going to be a huge thing. But Epic got hit And by virtue of that, the Texas whistleblower abortion website, which essentially was the center of the controversy, otherwise Anonymous probably wouldn't have hit them, is essentially to blame for this. So that's obviously a huge thing. We'll see where this goes. I will keep you up to date on that. But this could basically be a huge, huge problem for Epic, as well as Gab, Parler, and a whole bunch of these sites. So take that for what it's worth. I thought that would be an interesting way to end the day. And so those were your breaches of the week last week. Were you affected? Yeah, you probably were. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe and stay online, and please stay private. Thanks, everyone.